Last week, the Senate Appropriations Committee held a hearing on President Trump's supplemental request to pay for the war in Iran. At the hearing, I asked Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth to give us the latest accounting of the financial cost of this war. The Secretary estimated that it cost $37.5 billion. I might remind those who are following this statement, we're in the 5th month of the first year of this war in Iran. Cost so far at least $37.5 billion. I don't know how the Secretary arrived at that figure, especially considering the fact that it does not include the cost of repairing heavily damaged U.S. bases in the Middle East which have been attacked by Iran. All of this to say nothing of the cost to our service members who shoulder the burden of lengthy deployments, or most importantly of the 18 brave Americans who have been tragically killed in Iran. We owe them and their families a debt of gratitude that can never be repaid. So now the White House is coming to Congress with an $88 billion, that's right, $88 billion request for more money for the war in Iran and a few other items. For those of you watching at home who don't follow the ins and outs of Congress, this is a funding request outside the normal annual government funding process. This is usually reserved for serious emergencies and unexpected cost. This is despite the fact that the administration already has more than $75 million in unspent money for the Pentagon. $75 million unspent, and they're coming and ask us for another $88 billion. They're leaving a lot of change on the dresser. Moreover, if the funding is needed for the war in Iran, the administration, at a minimum, owes Congress and the American people a plan to end this self-inflicted mess. Make no mistake, Iran is a troubling actor that has for decades threatened America and allied interests. It terribly represses its own people and has not given up on its pursuit of a nuclear weapon. But President Trump's war with Iran has not resolved either of these issues. All it has done is draw us into a messy foreign entanglement with no clear end game. And now a growing number of American troops have been killed and wounded. Allies in the region are facing repeated missile attacks. The global economy has been held hostage by Iran's totally predictably stranglehold of the Strait of Hormuz. So before this Congress provides billions of dollars more, there are some questions that need to be answered. And I might add, I want to return, we've lost 18 brave servicemen. They can obviously never be replaced, and we owe them a debt of gratitude for their service to our nation. But the administration is virtually silent with the number of troops, our troops, who've been wounded in this war with Iran, some very seriously wounded. The numbers are over 400 casualties, along with the 18 who've given their lives. This is a costly venture of a war which the President initiated without going to the American people or to Congress as required by the Constitution, or to our allies, or to the public at large. The President did this on his own, believing it would be quick and over. We're learning again what we've learned so many times in the recent past. It is far easier to start a war than it is to end one, and we're seeing that to this day. Mr. President, on another unrelated topic, well, it is related, but it's different. The war in Ukraine has turned a good corner for us, with the real possibility for the first time in over 4 years that Russia will be finally forced to negotiate. I was at the NATO summit in Ankara, Turkey, earlier this month with several colleagues, including Senator Shaheen, Coons, the late Lindsey Graham, and Rounds, and the message was clear. Momentum is with Ukraine, and this is the time for American and European support to step up. But amid this shift, Ukraine desperately needs more air defenses to protect civilians from the brutal Russian attacks. Unfortunately, too many of these air defenses have been needed in the Gulf for President Trump's other war in Iran. And Ukraine still has not received $400 million we appropriated in the last year's appropriation bill, signed into law by the President. They're still waiting on it for air defense. I asked Secretary Hegseth why the Pentagon is taking so long to send this critical aid to Ukraine. He didn't have a good answer. President Trump needs to send the $400 million funds immediately. They're desperately needed in Ukraine to stop the Russian advances. Doing so will help bring President Putin to the negotiating table. And Secretary Hegseth also needs to move $200 million that we appropriate and the President signed into law for the Baltic Security Initiative to help frontline NATO allies prepare for Russian intimidation and retaliation. My last point is this. It's overdue for this chamber to act on Russia and Ukraine and legislation which Lindsey Graham was passionate about. The last time I met with him, just 3 or 4 days before he passed away, he brought this issue up, this idea of sanctions against Iran. I think that, sanctions against Russia. I think it is a valuable investment of our time, and I'm happy to co-sponsor this measure. Senator Graham understood the timeliness of this legislation to help force Russians to negotiate. He worked hard to find agreement on this bill, months and months of work with Senator Blumenthal and others, Senator Shaheen included. I know Majority Leader cares about helping Ukraine, so I'm glad the bill is set to move this week and look forward to its passage. It is truly a tribute to the kind of work which Lindsey Graham made in his career in the United States Senate and makes a difference in the world. Mr. President, I yield the floor.